All right, let's get started. So I'd like to welcome everybody to cognitive psychology. So this is your PSY-P 335 course. And what we're going to be doing today is we are going to be starting off with an overview of what cognitive psychology is, but more focused on how you can successfully navigate this course, what the expectations are, what's upcoming during the semester. So you can basically plan out your semester and maximize your learning experience during this time. So my name is Dr. Igor Yudichevich, and what we're going to be doing today is we'll start off with a brief introduction. Some of you I've seen before in my other classes, some of you are completely new, so I'll just give you a bit of background on who I am. Some of my research projects that I do, so I actually work in cognitive psychology using the approaches that you're going to learn about, and I'll show some of my research that I've done and the kind of findings that are possible when you use a cognitive psychology approach. We'll talk about the stigma-free initiative that I'm a part of. And then we're going to have a bit of a cognitive warm-up to sort of shake loose some of the mental cobwebs that might have accumulated over the break, but also to illustrate a very, very, very important principle that we'll be coming up against over and over again in cognitive psychology. And then we'll hit the course overview, course procedure, how everything is going to work. And then we'll finish off with some syllabus highlights. All right, so who am I? Before we get into the core of that, let's just start with the name and how to pronounce the name. So my name is Dr. Igor Yudichevich, and that last name is probably going to be one of the hardest things you learn this semester. So we'll just break it down piece by piece. So it starts off with a U. And then there's a reach, and then you open up and say ah, and it ends with a veach. And if there are any math minors in here with us, that little gray triangle there apparently is a veach. So it's you reach veach. So let's try that on 3. 1, 2, 3. Not bad for a January. Okay, so that's the name. And one of the reasons why I spent some time introducing myself this way is because I don't want any barriers to exist between any students reaching out and asking for help or making a contribution to class or engaging in a discussion with me. So there's a name, Dr. Yudichevich. And if you ever have any questions during the lecture, you can put up your hand, Dr. Yudichevich. I didn't quite understand what you, the explanation that you just gave, or can you mention it? Can you explain it in another way? Can you possibly think of another example, to illustrate that point? If you want to contribute to a discussion, or if you have an idea, an observation, and goes up, Dr. Yudichevich, is this anything like what I saw in that movie where that guy did that thing with the car? And I'll be like, I need more details, but probably it is. So I just don't want there to be a barrier for anybody who needs to reach out to me. So there's a name. You can refer to this slide again during the semester. So you reach of each, and just feel free to reach out so that you can maximize, again, your learning experience. All right, so who am I? The aspects of me that are my research projects. I work in cognitive psychology, and recently what I've been working on is the field of visual language. So visual language, it's a expanding field, especially in the last few years. And it's the idea that we communicate with images, and it's not haphazard, it's not arbitrary, the same way that we have a spoken language and a written language that has rules and formats and syntax and ways that we understand it. The same thing goes with visual language. And much of my work has been focused on a particular source of visual language, which is comic book images. So one of the things that comic books need to do is they need to communicate visually a lot of ideas, a lot of concepts. They need to use a visual language to help people understand what is going on in the story. And yet at the same time, they're not something that people train themselves on. It's not something that you begin to read in high school, and then maybe by the time that you're in university, you can understand the complexities of what a comic book is. Now, this is delivered and addressed to main culture, mainstream society. And because of that, it is uses a very basic, universally understood visual language to communicate a lot of its ideas. So what are some of these ideas? What are some of these language lexicons that they use? Well, one of the ones that we've taken a look at in my lab is the idea of the giant image, or the image of a giant individual. So here we have Daredevil, and he's running towards the observer. And then we have an image of the Kingpin. And the image of the Kingpin, I believe it's a reflection in a mirror, but it is drawn way bigger than Daredevil is. So this is a use of visual language to indicate that the Kingpin is dangerous, that the Kingpin is going to be very important in this story, that the Kingpin might be like an omnipresent threat to Daredevil. And when you start learning about visual language, you start seeing the same phrases, quote unquote, pop up over and over and over again. So here we have one with for a cover of the Falcon, and I believe that's Blackheart. But again, we have that giant size to indicate a large threat, indicate somebody that's going to be very important to the story. And these are almost mirror images of each other. They're very much alike, much like the same way that two sentences can have very different objects, subjects, verbs. But again, that structure is all the same. So the large size of the Kingpin and large size of Blackheart compared to that smaller size of Daredevil and the smaller size of the Falcon. So this was work that I published with actually a, well, actually, no, not this one. So this, we're going to take a look at right now, was a study that I published with an undergraduate student who was graduated a few years ago here at IUSB. And what we did in this case was we wanted to analyze how does visual language communicate motion? Because the picture is static, right? The picture is not moving. It's not like a film. It's not like a motion picture. Pictures aren't moving. And yet at the same time, you can perceive the motion quite easily. You know that in this case, Quicksilver is running, and it's not that there's 4 different Quicksilvers. It's not that he has a bunch of string attached to him, and that's why we get these action lines over here. We analyzed aspects of these to see exactly how do you get and understand the communication that this is one individual and he is running extremely quickly all around Spider-Man. So another study that we did, a follow-up to that study, was the analysis of pictorial metaphors in comic book art, test of the Lamode theory. And the Lamode theory came about from that previous research, and that is the literal additive metaphorical one and done theory. I like it because it sounds like you're getting ice cream. But in this theory, basically it said, what we found previously was that artists would combine literal devices, literal phrases in visual language, as many as they possibly can, but they would only use one metaphorical phrase. So to give you an example of what I mean by that, let's say that you were trying to depict somebody falling. So up there on the upper right, we have an image, a schematic image of somebody that is falling to the ground. So when you're drawing that, you can draw certain aspects, you can communicate in that visual language certain aspects that literally occur in the real world when a person is falling. So when a person is falling, at some point, they are no longer connected to the ground, and their arms and legs will be in a particular sort of orientation. In this case, arms up above your head, feet out in front of you. So there are a number of things that literally happen, which can be communicated using literal devices in this visual language. On the other hand, there are certain things that you can use to depict falling that don't happen. And these are called metaphorical visual language. So in that bottom right example there, you see a lot of the literal devices that are used, but you also see the metaphorical device of multiple images. And it doesn't matter how far or how fast you are falling, at no point will you literally split into 5 different entities because you're falling so quickly. right? That doesn't happen. And yet that metaphor is understood. Much like if you tell somebody in spoken language, life is a journey, people won't take a look at you and say, well, no, life is actually your existence upon this earth for a determined period of time. It's not a journey. They understand, oh, you mean a metaphor. You mean like life is not literally a journey. Life is a journey in the sense that where there's a beginning, there's an end, you navigate your way through. Okay, I get it. So in this case, you understand those multiple images as a metaphorical device. And the question that we asked was, how do they combine those into a understandable language? Are there rules about how how artists will combine this? And what we found was that for literal devices, artists will use as many literal devices, and each one increases the quality of the image. But for metaphorical devices, they will only use one metaphorical device, and after that, they will not add any more, indicating that those additional metaphorical devices do not add to our understanding of the image.
I was just gonna ask, when doing doubling or like smears and stuff like that, I always saw it as I always saw it as it stemming from the motion captured by like cameras, because that causes smears and doubling and stuff like that.
So that is an excellent point. One of the things that we need to do when we do this kind of research is we need to define what is a literal device and what is a metaphorical device. And you can draw that line in a number of different ways, and it's not completely agreed upon. So you make a good point. This is one of the ones that people sort of struggle with. And you don't even need to resort to photography. If you just start waving your hand in front of you, you'll see the two, everybody can still see me. Yeah, okay. But if you wave your hand in front of you, you can see the multiple images that are occurring. However, one of the interesting things about that is that if it was the case that they were still fundamentally the same, then we wouldn't have found the relationships that we did, where you can add the position of the arms, you can add the orientation of the body, you can add the position of the ground, and each one of those goes up. But if you add multiple images and action lines together, it adds nothing to each other. It will add to the literal devices. So if I have 3 literal devices like I just described, and I add action lines to that image, the quality of that image, people's understanding of it increases. If I have 3 literal devices and I add multiple images to that image, understanding increases. But if I have 3 literal devices and a metaphorical device, so I have the position of the arms, position of the body above the ground, and I have action lines, and then to that image, I add metaphorical multiple images, it does nothing to the quality of the image. It doesn't make it any more understandable. So it's a good observation. It is one of those things where at a conference, you will get people saying, well, I use this definition of metaphor, and other people will say, I use this definition of metaphor, which is why it's always important to be very clear when you're writing and reading these, what definition is being used, because people will differ. But there does seem to be some fundamentally different way that our brains process that metaphorical information, because the metaphorical information just does not add to each other. All right, so that was the work that I did on visual language and motion. I also did some work on visual language and the metaphor of close-up eye asymmetry. So this was actually one that was near and dear to my heart. This was a special edition of the Comics Grid that came out after David Bowie's death. I believe it was January 8th, about 7 years ago now. Anyways, they were asking for people to do research on David Bowie's contribution to comics. And I did this research on close-up eye asymmetry, which is basically where you have a close-up image of a person and there is something asymmetrical about their eye. And what that does is it basically communicates that the person is like you because they're close up to you. So people that are different from you are typically far away from you. People that are like you, we tend to congregate in like tribes of people. So the people that are close to you tend to be like you. So that close up indicates that they're like you. But the eye asymmetry, bilateral symmetry, is something that is very common. And when that is not present, it means that they're not like you. So this close-up eye asymmetry metaphor can communicate that somebody is like you and unlike you at the same time. So I surmise that, well, comic book characters, specifically superheroes, oftentimes, and supervillains, oftentimes need to communicate that, right? So Superman is kind of like you, right, in the sense that he looks human, but he's not really like you in the sense that he's a superhero. Batman is kind of like you in the sense that he's a human, but he's not really like you in the sense that he dresses up in a latex costume and goes around punching bad guys in the face, right? These are different, these are subtle things that need to be communicated. So what I did in this study was I took a look at the image of Aladdin Sane. So you can see the album cover there, one of the most famous covers in rock and roll history. And I looked at its impact on the use of these, on the use of the close-up eye asymmetry. And what you found was that it wasn't when the album came out that people started using close-up eye asymmetry. So let me just explain that graph a little bit, just real quick. So these lines here indicate across time how many comic book covers use close-up eye asymmetry to depict a character on that cover. So every time the line goes up, that means another cover was using close-up eye asymmetry. And then the yellow line here, those are golden age characters debuts. So golden age, like Batman, Wonder Woman, Superman. And then we have Bronze Age debuts. And Bronze Age is more, that's in the 70s and the 80s. So that's like Wolverine, Punisher. So we took a look at what happens when somebody's depiction has already been set in stone, as if their visual language has already been established, how you talk about them visually has already been established, versus ones that debuted after David Bowie. And what we found was the effect of this image in mainstream culture and on artists for characters that were already established, already had their way of being drawn. It was very minimal. But the effect of this image on artists who were drawing new characters, right? Characters that didn't have an established visual language, that effect was massive. And it was massive right around here. And that's what really let us know that we were onto something, because what kind of lined up in all of this are a few things. Number one is the idea of a crystallizing event. And a crystallizing event is something that oftentimes in people happens in their teenage years. And it's an exposure to something that basically becomes part of your worldview. It becomes part of your basic tastes or basic kind of ideas about culture. So, you know, that really influential album that you listened to, that movie that you saw, that cover that you witnessed. So anybody that was a teenager here and became a comic book artist hit their 30s right around there. And when you're an artist, your peak creative era, your peak creative time is usually in your early 30s. So if you take a look at Picasso, you take a look at Leonardo da Vinci, you take a look at many of these famous artists, and you look at the paintings that they are famous for, those were the ones that they did in their 30s. So once these teenagers who were exposed to David Bowie's Aladdin Sane in 1973 aged up to the point where they were at their max creative time, that's when close-up eye asymmetry, this metaphor, just skyrocketed in its use. So that was super interesting. And then also, this is my only publication that I got to use. Where is it? There it is. I got to drop an F-bomb in an actual peer-reviewed publication. So I crossed that off my bucket list. Just a little something, not having anything to do with cognitive psychology. Just thought I'd bring it up. All right. Oh yeah, and then I replicated this, I checked it out in other ways, did other versions of this study. And one of the ones that I particularly liked was this idea that close-up eye asymmetry, it was more of a sort of Gothic visual metaphor in the sense that it communicated more of those Gothic themes, especially the what was it called? Especially the communicates the abject, right? So in Gothic literature, Gothic movies, there's always that idea of the abject. There's always that idea of somebody that needs to be put aside or isolated from society. So you have the vampire. Vampire can't be a part of regular society. Vampire needs to be put aside. You have that crazy mad scientist. Crazy mad scientist doesn't live next door, right? Crazy mad scientist lives in the castle on the hill and is apart from society. So that idea of who's a part of society, who's not a part of society, basically who is like me and not unlike me, that idea can be communicated with close-up eye asymmetry. So we did a study where we looked at, in the history of depictions of Batman and in the history of depictions of Superman, which one of these used more close-up eye asymmetry? Because Batman is a Gothic character, very Gothic character. Superman, not at all Gothic. So if close-up eye asymmetry was communicating Gothic ideas and through a visual language, then we should see more instances of Batman being depicted with close-up eye asymmetry than we do of Superman. And these were the results. So once again, each uptick in that line is another cover that used close-up eye asymmetry. And my favorite thing about this was that I was actually able to create the graph where in the graph itself, Superman does not have close-up eye asymmetry because the line does not intersect with his eye, but Batman does. And again, doesn't really have anything to do with the findings, but took me a little bit of time to get it right. One reviewer noticed it, so I hope other readers did as well. But basically, we have again proof right here that this visual metaphor, this information that is coming in is being understood by our human minds and does communicate this idea of, okay, this character is like me, but this character is also not like me. All right, and then the last little piece of research that I'll let you know about, just to kind of give you an idea of the scope of things you can do in cognitive psychology, even if you're in just this one area of visual language. The last thing that we'll talk about is when we stepped outside of comic books and we started looking at art history. And this was a study that I did with another undergrad student. And basically, we wanted to see how does contextual information and metaphorical information combine in order for us to understand when something is drawn giant size. Is it an actual giant? Like, is it a huge statue? Or is it a metaphorical giant, right? Just something that is extremely important. So to give you an example of that, here we have Maesta or Maesta of Duccio. So this is a drawing of Mary and Jesus. And as you can see, Mary and Jesus, if you were to take this literally, they would be approximately 15 feet tall. They are giantly, well, Mary would be 15 feet tall. They are depicted as giants. And yet it's understood that they are not actually giants, but this is just a way of showing veneration. This is a way of showing how important they are. This is a way of showing that they are the subject of this image. So what we did is we took a look at, out of the top 1,000 most famous artworks, we took a look at every single one that had the depiction of a giant in them or a large-sized individual. And then we took a look and divided them up into whether or not structurally there was information that this thing was literal, or structurally there was indication that this thing was metaphorical. So the structural information was the information that was actually in the picture. And if it indicated that it was literal, structurally, those would be things like drawing a complete image, drawing an image that is interacting with the environment, These are all structural cues that this giant actually exists for real in this depicted environment. But metaphorically, if, for example, your legs disappeared, structurally, that would be an indication that this is a metaphorical giant. It's not drawn in completely. And then we had contextual information. So what is the art style? What was the art period? What do you know about the history of the, the artwork? So for example, in the Maesta, contextually, if you know about Renaissance painting, if you know about painting in that era, you would know that religious figures were drawn much larger than their less important, in this instance, counterpart. So we had those four combinations, and we were wondering, is there a certain way that artists will combine these? Is there some sort of grammatical syntax that is used between contextual information and structural information? And what we found was that there absolutely is. And without getting too convoluted, because this always messes me up as well, when you have that first example that has structural information telling you that is a literal giant statue of a woman, it has contextual information telling you that that is a literal giant statue of a woman, and you can see that tall blue line says that artists will use that combination very often. And one of the things to always remember is that when you use art from popular culture, when you use art that is famous, when you use art that has basically had the stamp of approval of millions and millions of viewers, you are using art that is easily understood. These artists needed to pay their bills. And if they went to a commission and they said, hey, look at this picture, and the rich person that was buying it says, I don't understand what you just drew, they weren't getting paid. But if they said, hey, look at this picture, and the rich person was like, oh, I get it. Yeah, that's good. Put it on my wall. Here's your check. So all of the ones that are used frequently, we can assume that they are easily understood. So congruent, literal, literal structural, literal contextual, used very often. Incongruent. Structural tells you that it's literal, but the context tells you that it's a metaphor. So you look at the picture and you say, well, that's a real giant, but then you know the context and you're like, oh no, they mean it's a, it's a regular sized person. They're just important. That is used a lot. Congruent metaphorical, where the structure in complete images tells you that it's metaphorical, and the context, the history of the time tells you that it's metaphorical as well. That is used very often, but you can see this one here, where it says structural metaphorical, congruent literal, that is barely used. That is not well understood. So there is something to this visual language. There is something to that combination of information where you can have certain combinations and our mind will be able to decode those, but you put in other combinations and it just gets very, very confusing. All right, so any questions on the visual language work that I do? All right, and I lied, I got one more study just to tell you about, but this one is not visual language. This one is actually part of my side projects that I have in my research. And this one was about STEM stereotypes and Marvel superheroes and the superpowers that they depict. And one of the things that we wanted to take a look at with this study is, why is there a lack of gender diversity in certain areas of STEM? So if you take a look at the number or percentage of bachelor degrees in different areas of STEM that are being awarded to women, that's what this graph is. If you take a look at what percentage of bachelor degrees go to women, you can see that in a lot of STEM areas, there is not this diversity there. So for example, computer science, only 20% of undergraduate degrees are awarded to women, 80% are awarded to men. In engineering, we only get about 23% being awarded to women. So that is a huge gender gap. And then the other one, not so much talked about, but extremely problematic and extremely not diverse, is psychology. So psychology is actually worse than engineering in the sense that 80% of undergraduate degrees in psychology are awarded to women, and only 20% are awarded to men. So you have these areas of science, technology, and mathematics, engineering and mathematics that are somehow, and this is what we're trying to figure out, somehow pushing women away and saying, this isn't for you. And then we have other areas that are somehow pushing men away. And they're saying, well, this isn't for you. And what that's doing is it's leading to this lack of diversity. And at some point in this course, we'll talk about diversity when we talk about cognition and the impact that it can have on trying to problem solve. But before we get there, one of the things that we looked at in this study as a possible explanation is what are boys and girls communicated to in terms of what you're good at. And one of the ways that you can do that is when you're reading a comic book, when you're reading a story, what are the girls in that story good at? And what are the boys in that story good at? And is there patterns there that then communicate to the readers that girls are good at this and boys are good at this? And then, bit of a spoiler alert, does that then translate into their career choices later on? Do they have this message that they've internalized that girls are better at certain things, and because of that, I'm going to go into psychology rather than computer science? And are boys told boys are better at certain things, and because of that, I'm going to go into computer science and I'm going to avoid psychology? So what we did is we took a look at what are the superpowers that Marvel superheroes are saying are boy superpowers, and which ones do they say are girl superpowers. So we literally took all the superpowers that were listed, and then we took a look at which ones specifically had anything to do with the idea of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So we narrowed that down to a whole bunch of different superpowers. And then those were organized into ones that are hard STEM skills and ones that are soft STEM skills. So things like hard STEM skills would be things like electricity control, the ability to make gadgets, like it or hate it, insanely rich is a huge advantage in a lot of STEM fields. So those are the hard STEM skill powers that were related to those. And then we had soft STEM skills, such as being adaptive, being able to collaborate, being able to communicate effectively. These are a lot of the soft skills that people are looking for and companies are looking for these days in STEM, and so on and so forth. We took a look at what are the hard skills, what are the soft skills. And then what we did is, we'll just focus on the hard skills for now. We took a look at what percentage of superheroes have these powers that are male, and what percentage of them have the powers that are female. So for example, gadgets. Gadgets before 1991, if you were reading comic books with characters before 1991, that was predominantly a male power. So people like Mr. Fantastic, people like Spider-Man, you know, the web shooters, the fantastical gadgets, you know, science gadgets that Mr. Fantastic made. Typically, if you had a superhero that was with gadgets, it was a male superhero. And that was communicating to readers, hey, if you're a guy, you're good at gadgets. And if you're a woman, maybe gadgets aren't for you. Very nicely, though, for characters that came after the year 2000, that difference has disappeared. So that's a nice thing for the future. But what has that done to people's willingness to pursue computer science versus their willingness to pursue something like psychology? So this would indicate or would predict that men would be more likely to pursue computer science and engineering because they've been told their entire childhood, hey, guess what? Boys are good at gadgets. You're really good at gadgets. So when they come to make their career decision, maybe somewhere deep inside, they have that preconceived notion and they think to themselves, you know what? I want to go into something I'm good at. So maybe engineering is the thing for me. Whereas women who are not told that they were good at gadgets might avoid engineering. On the other hand, empathy, the ability to sense somebody else's emotions, the ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, the ability to identify with somebody else. That was predominantly a female superpower. So there were very, very, very few male superheroes that had, or supervillains that had empathy as a superpower. And to the extent that people always say that, you know, I kind of have this intuition, you know, I kind of can sense how my friends are feeling, and that's why I went into psychology. A lot of people believe that empathy is a skill that is very favorable to a career in psychology. And again, all these young girls were being told, you got empathy, you got empathy, you got empathy. And all these young boys were being told, you don't have any empathy. And would that impact their future choices and whether they pursue psychology or whether they pursue something else? And once again, very nicely, for characters post 2000 that were developed post the year 2000, that gender disparity has disappeared. So does this actually make a difference? Do these depictions of what heroes are good at what skills, whether boy heroes are good at certain skills and girl heroes are good at other skills, does this make any impact? Well, our final little graph here indicates that it does, because if you take a look on that x-axis there, we have the amount of gender bias in the relevant powers for a particular discipline, right? So I split up all the powers into powers that are good for engineering, powers that are good for computer science, powers that are good for biological sciences. And if you took a look at the disparity for ones that are male biased versus ones that are female biased, and then you correlate that with the bachelor degrees that are awarded to women, you can see that the male biased superpowers were in engineering, we're in computer science, and that's where we have more men than women. That's where we have a huge gender disparity favoring men in those areas. So for engineering, for computer science, male biased superpowers leads to possibly male dominated STEM field. On the other hand, female biased powers, such as psychology, you can see that the number of relevant powers that make a difference in psychology are usually depicted in females, and that correlates once again with how many women are being awarded degrees in this, or basically how many women choose to go into psychology. And you can see that the line there, that line of best fit, captures even some of those middle cases. So one of the most gender diverse areas of STEM is biological sciences. That actually has a kind of 50-50 split. Social sciences as well, agricultural sciences. And when you take a look at the superheroes that have agricultural science powers, they're basically split between how many males are depicted that way and how many females are depicted that way. So here we have a very nice indication of how information that gets into your mind and is processed in a certain way can affect your decisions later on in your life in very, very profound ways. All right, so any questions on any of the research that I did? That was just to kind of give you an overview, a taste of some of the things that I work on. We're good? All right, so the last thing that I'm going to talk about myself, I realize I've been doing this for a while, is the Stigma-Free Initiative. So I'm a part of the National Alliance on Mental Health Stigma-Free Initiative, and basically this is an initiative that they started a few years back to try to lift the stigma surrounding mental health. And it was done just kind of by being honest and open about issues of mental health. So I always do the analogy of, if you were suffering from a physical injury, like if you walked in and your arm was broken and somebody said, hey, are you okay? You wouldn't say, yeah, I'm fine. And if they were like, are you sure your arm looks broken? You wouldn't say, oh no, it's not broken. I'm doing fine. It's good. You know, I'm fine. That's a physical injury. Mental injuries, mental illnesses, they're completely different. People will cover them up. There's shame that is associated with them. Usually you got a broken arm. Nobody's feeling shame that they broke their arm. But there's a lot of shame with mental health. So this is my part of trying to lift that stigma. So I do struggle with mental health issues, mostly depression and anxiety, and just kind of give you a bit of a history on that, and to also show you there's hope but it is a process. Just to let you know, I started here at IUSB back in 2010. I was diagnosed with depression officially in 2012. I would love to tell you that I was diagnosed within a month maybe of having symptoms, that I went to my doctor right away and said, hey, you know what, I'm struggling. I'm not having a good time. Things are going wrong. But no, I was undiagnosed, covering things up for ages. So diagnosed with depression, I had my final prescription filled in 2013. And that began the long road of recovery. I would also love to tell you that when I filled my final prescription, that was it. I was cured. It was all done, all good. We're off to the races. Doesn't actually happen. Still in recovery, still working on my mental health. But just to kind of show you the impact that this can have on your ability to perform the things that you need to do in university, in your university career. One of the big measures of how you're doing in your field is how are your publications? How many publications do you have? How much research are you putting out there? That is one of those big metrics that they measure success and whether you're going to continue on at a university. So when I started at IUSB, 2 years later, I was able to publish my first paper, and this was basically 80% done before I started IUSB, so it really wasn't that much to get it across the finish line. But you can see that this happened during my depression time. Once I started recovering, once I started to get my life back together, once I started to get my thought patterns back together, then all of a sudden my productivity just started to increase. So I had publications, both peer-reviewed and non-peer-reviewed. That's what the green and the blue is. So in 2016, 2 publications. Later in 2016, another one. 2017, I had one of those big years. And this is what can happen when you go through therapy, when you go through a treatment program. It can turn around, things can get better. And again, I would love to tell you that it was nothing but up, up, up. After that, it was nothing but sunshine and roses. But since those years, I've had some years that have been great. I've also had some years that have been absolutely horrible. I've had 2 of the worst years of my life since that time. And it's been ups and downs. And I have been in therapy. I have been out of therapy. I have gone back into therapy. And I'm currently in therapy right now. So I just wanted to let you know about that. For a couple of reasons. Number one, in a cognitive psychology course, we're talking about how your mind processes things, and mental illness oftentimes is a result of your mind not processing things in the right way. So it's important to know that and the impact that it can have. The other reason I like to talk about this on the first class, other than lifting that stigma, is I know that being a student is an extremely difficult and stressful time for a lot of people. I know that a lot of students schedule themselves to within like a razor's edge of I can handle this versus I can't handle this. And when one thing goes out of line, everything tumbles down. I get it. I've been through it. I've gone through mental illnesses. So if you are struggling at all and you need to reach out to somebody, I'll ask you, an employee, reach out to me, send me a Canvas message, and don't wait. Do it right away. Like if you're falling behind, if you feel overwhelmed with some of the things that we're doing in this course, if you are just finding yourself that you just are having a difficult time handling it at this time, handling life at this time. Maybe it has nothing to do with the course. Maybe it's something outside of the course. Whatever it is, reach out to me. I will help you in any way that I can. And if I can't, I will point you in the right direction where you can get help. And again, like I said, that undiagnosed part, I wish I reached out sooner. And one of the things that I always kind of breaks my heart a little bit is when I get that email from a student and they tell me, you know what, I should have emailed you a month and a half ago, you know, and I'm just reaching out now because things have gotten dire, right? Email me a month and a half ago. Just let me know. tell me and say something like, hey, you know what, I'm having a real hard time right now. And I don't think I'll be able to come to class, for a couple of weeks. I just need to get my mind right. Is there a way that I can catch up on stuff or anything like that? Just reach out. And again, we'll figure something out. I've been there. I understand. I get it. The other thing that kind of breaks my heart is when students, you can tell in their language, they don't want to seem lazy and they don't want to seem like they're making excuses. And when I was covering myself with my mental illness, that's what I felt as well, that I'm just being lazy, I'm just making excuses. You're not. It's real, and I get it. So I never read that email and think to myself, oh, this student is just trying to get away with stuff. I always think back to when I went through it and said, yep, this feels real. So reach out and do it early. All right, enough about me. That's it. We're done. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to do a real quick cognitive warm-up. So this is going to be 2 challenges, and I'm going to ask you to try to answer as best as you can. And this is going to be 3 challenges that illustrate 2 extremely important concepts that we're going to come across over and over again in cognitive psychology. So let's get going. Challenge number 1. Challenge number 1 is your 2 trains problem. All right, so 2 trains, 100 miles apart, both begin to travel directly towards each other. So you got train 1, train 2, traveling directly towards each other. Train 1 travels at a speed of 60 miles per hour. Train 2 travels at a speed of 40 miles per hour. As soon as the trains begin to travel towards each other, a bird on train 1 begins to fly directly towards train 2 at 80 miles per hour. As soon as the bird reaches train 2, it immediately begins to travel back to train 1 at 80 miles per hour. The bird continues to do this until the 2 trains collide. And the question is, how many miles has the bird flown? I.e., what is the total distance of all the trips that the bird made? So by the time the 2 trains collide, how far has that bird flown in miles? So give that a shot. I'll give you 5 minutes and go. All right, 3 minutes left. Does anybody have an answer yet? Hands up. All right, keep going. All right, 2 minutes left. Is anybody getting close to a solution where 2 minutes is gonna make a difference? Hands up if that's you. Anybody feel like I could give you another 5 hours and we got one? Okay. Oh, sorry.
I guess, I don't know.
Oh, okay. All right, well, we'll let's call it there. Because I can see a lot of not furious writing, so I'm thinking a lot of people might have packed it in. And what the reason I chose this problem, the reason I chose this challenge is because this is a challenge that indicates how your mental representations can really impact your thoughts and your behavior. So one of the things that we're going to spend a lot of time talking about in cognitive psychology are how are things mentally represented in your mind. And it makes a big difference whether you choose one representation or you choose another representation. And this is a great example of that. So challenge number one, if your mind represented this as a distance problem, then you were in trouble because it made it incredibly difficult to solve this problem. So if you represent it as a distance problem, if you think to yourself, well, how far have those trains how far does that bird travel, right? I need to figure out how many miles that bird travels. If you represent it as a distance problem, well, then you do step one. You're like, okay, this bird flies at 80 miles an hour. Train two travels towards the bird at 40 miles an hour. So their net speed is 120 miles per hour towards each other. And they were 100 miles apart. So they're going to take 50 minutes before they meet. Right? So that is step one of the solution. And then you think to yourself, all right, during those 50 minutes, train two travels 33.33 miles. Bird traveled 66.67 miles. So we have that first estimate of how far the bird has traveled. And then we go step three, during those 50 minutes, train one traveled 50 miles because it goes at 60 miles per hour for 50 minutes, that's 50 miles. Train two travels 33.33 miles. So the distance apart now is 16.67 miles. And then you basically rinse and repeat, and you repeat, and you repeat, and then you're going to get to infinitesimally small times. So you're going to have to use calculus for when your distances and your times approach zero. But the bottom line is that if you did this, if you represented this as a bird distance problem, then you set yourself up for multiple steps. And that meant that you are going to take hours and hours before you actually came up with the solution. That's with a distance representation. On the other hand, let's say that you did a time representation. Let's say that your mind decided to represent this problem as a time problem rather than a distance problem. Well, in that case, put that guy back up there. We got step number one. The net speed of the trains is 100 miles per hour, right? Train one is 60 miles per hour. Train two is 40 miles per hour. They're going towards each other. That's a net speed of 100 miles per hour. There's a distance of 100 miles between them. So they're going to crash within 1 hour. So this bird is going to be flying for 1 hour. So step two, the bird will fly for an hour. The bird's speed is 80 miles per hour. Or it flies 80 miles. And you're done, right? Two-step problem. So that's just to illustrate how important representations are to your behavior and to your thoughts. Because some representations make things really easy. Some representations make things really hard. Some representations make things possible. Other representations make them impossible. So one of the things that we're going to be doing in this course is trying to figure out, how does our mind represent certain things? How does it represent attention? How does it represent memory? How does it represent external objects in a 3D world? How does it represent problems that we're trying to solve? And what are the sort of pitfalls that we fall into when we represent it wrong? And how can we possibly get out of those pitfalls? And that's going to be especially important when we get to decision making. Speaking of decision making, cognitive warm-up number 2. All right, so challenge number 2. This one is not as mathematically involved. It does have some math, But let's consider the following game. So consider the following game of chance. You pay a fixed fee, you pay an entry fee to enter, and then a fair coin is tossed repeatedly until tail appears, ending the game. So you pay to play this game, and then they'll flip a coin and they'll be like heads, they'll flip it again, they'll be like heads, they'll flip it again, it'll be tails, game over. So the game ends when a tail appears. You're playing for a pot, and the pot starts at $1, and it's doubled every single time a head appears. And then you win whatever is in the pot after the game ends. So if a tail appears on the first toss, then you get $1, right? So at the very least, this thing is worth $1, right? Because you can't do worse than $1. So if a tail appears on the first toss, you get $1. $2 if a head appears on the second toss, and head appears on the first toss and a tail on the second. So if you go head tail, you get yourself $2. If you go head tail, you get yourself $4. If you go head tail, you make yourself $8, and so on and so forth. $16, $32, $64. The pot just keeps doubling and doubling and doubling, and you get whatever the pot is at once that tails is thrown. So here's the challenge. 2 questions. Number 1, what would be a fair or rational price to pay for entering this game? So I already gave you a clue about that. It's more than $1. This game is worth more than $1 to play because you can make $1 guaranteed. So the game is worth more than $1. So what would be a fair, rational price to pay to enter this game? And then question number 2, how much would you personally pay to enter this game? So how much is this game worth to you? If you wanted to play this game, how much would you put up in order to play the game? For this one, I'm only going to give you 100 seconds. Try to come up with, whoops, where's my 100 seconds? Try to come up with, play. Oh, 100 seconds isn't working. All right, we're going to do it old-fashioned way. I'm going to look at the clock. I'm going to give you a minute and a half. Just try to think about, number 1, rationally, how much should this game cost? Number 2, how much would you be willing to pay for it? All right, so hopefully everybody's got their numbers. Okay, so these 2 questions are the types of 2 of the most important questions that we ask as cognitive psychologists. The first one is, what should a person do, right? What is a rational thing to do? What is a fair thing to do? What is a logical thing to do? And that's known as prescriptive or normative decisions or normative answers. And then the bottom one, how much would you pay to enter the game? That is what humans actually do. That is the descriptive portion of it. And what we do as cognitive psychologists is we use the normative or prescriptive, what you should do, as a starting point. And then we take a look at what humans actually do. And then we say, well, what processes, what information processing procedures accounts for that discrepancy between what we should be doing logically and what we're actually doing. So what should we be doing? So did anybody get a number for what is a fair rational price for this? Hmm.
I think it should just be $1.
You think it should just be $1?
Yeah,
So so by fair rational price, that means not what you would pay for it, but what it actually is worth?
yeah,
Okay.
well, it depends what the purpose of the game is, I guess.
Oh, okay. Well, in this case, maybe I should have explained it a little bit more. Basically, in this case, if you're ever proposed with a game of chance, there's a certain expected amount that you will win in the long run, right? And that expected amount, that is the rational fair price to pay for that particular game. So if I was offering you $100 on a single coin flip, and I was willing to let you play that game for $20, you should play that all day, every day. Because your expected outcome every single time is $50, right? You're not going to get it every single time. Sometimes you get 100, sometimes you get 0. But on average, you'll get 50. And if it's only costing you 20, well, then you're making $30 profit basically every single time that you do it. That's a rational amount to pay. If you were paying $70 to play that coin flip game where you get 100 or 0, well, then you're going to lose money in the long run. That's an irrational amount to pay. So basically, everybody that goes to a casino and plays games of chance like roulette or blackjack, they are making an irrational decision. They are paying an irrational amount of money because they're on the long run losing. So how much is this game worth in the long run? What is your average payout in this game if you were able to play it over multiple times? Well, we can use math to answer this fairly straightforwardly. So with a probability of 1/2, you win $1, right? That's your first flip. Maybe you win $1 on your first flip, or you go on to the game. So with a 1/2 probability, you win $1. With a quarter probability, you win $2, right? Because there's a 1/4 chance that you get heads on the first flip, tails on the second. With a 1/8 probability, you win $4. And then that just keeps going. With a 1/16, you win $8. With a 1/32 chance, you win $16. So your expected take in this game is the sum of every single payout and the probability that you'll get that payout. So it's the sum of 50/50 times $1, and the sum of 1/4, 25% times 2, and the sum of 1/8 times 4. It's the sum of all of those things. But you'll notice 1/2 of 1 is a half. 1/4 of 2 is a half. 1/8 of 4 is a half. This is just 1/2 plus 1/2 plus 1/2 plus 1/2 for infinity, which means that the rational price to pay for this game is infinite. So if you are a rational person, if you are a logical thinker, and somebody came up to you and said, hey, I'm going to let you play this game, it costs $5. Rationally, you should be like, yes, let's do it. If they came up to you and said it costs $100, you should say, yes, let's do it. If they came up and said it costs $10,000, you would say, I need to get a loan, but yes, let's do it. $100,000, absolutely. $1 million, yes. This game is worth those amounts of money, rationally, logically. I guarantee you not a single person in here probably had anything. Did anybody have anything over 100? Exactly. So so that's your fair price. How much did you pay to enter the game? Logically, if we were logical actors, if our brains worked logically, our minds worked logically, everybody down here should have been like, oh yeah, infinite. I will pay whatever the amount is because this game will give me an outcome that is in my benefit, regardless of the amount that I paid. However, nobody here went over 100. So cognitive psychology then comes in and says, well, why is that? Where is that disconnect? What is going on in the processing that we're getting that disconnect between the two? And we're going to take a look at some of those processes throughout this course. All right. Course objectives. We're going to fly through this a little bit because we only got about 10 minutes left. But the basic approach to this course is going to be to take a look at the information that is coming into your mind. And what is the information that is going out? What is the behavior that produces? And what does that tell you about the way that your mind works? And we're going to take a look at attention and perception. We're going to take a look at memory, linguistics, problem solving, thinking. Basically, all of cognition is we're going to touch on it to see what is going on in your mind that explains how the information coming in leads to information and behavior going out. And in terms of the course procedure, I alluded to this earlier on. I like to run my courses like a research lab meeting. So if you have questions, put your hand up, we'll discuss it. Had a couple of nice discussions today. So there are no bad questions or bad ideas. I'm sure you've heard this before, no bad questions, only the ones that aren't asked. There are no bad ideas. However, there are wrong ideas. And I do not want you leaving this course with wrong ideas about cognitive psychology. And much like in my research, when I am doing research, especially in psychology, a lot of the ideas that you have are wrong. They just are. Mainstream society, mainstream culture has done a horrible job of communicating what psychology actually is. But you know what? Having wrong ideas, that's just how science works. We're ready for it. So just ask your questions and we'll make sure that we get through this course and get a true understanding of what cognitive psychology is. All right. Office hours. I do Zoom office hours. So the Zoom link is there. Mondays and Wednesdays, 2:45 to 3:45 is when the office hours are. Feel free to just drop in. You don't have to make an appointment. If I'm in there with somebody else, I'll just write you a quick little note, be with you soon. But just feel to drop in if you have any questions about the course, anything that's coming up, especially in this first week. If things are going wrong, like if Canvas is not working the way that it's supposed to work, let me know. And if we need to have an office hour meeting so we can walk you through it, we can do that. But use the office hours there. It's drop in, no need to make an appointment. Don't use my phone. I don't have it hooked up, honestly, anymore. So please do not call my office, but get in touch with me using Canvas messages. Canvas messages, I use a response window for Canvas messages. So you are guaranteed to get a response within 24 hours. But my response window is from 2:45 to 3:45. And what that means is that if you get a message in by 2:45, you will get a response that day by 3:45. But if you miss that window and you send me a message, say at 6:30 p.m., I will not get back to you or will not be able to get back to you until the next day's window. So at most it's 24 hours, but just be aware of that. I do have that response window and it's Mondays to Fridays. I'm trying to set a good example for everybody. Your weekends, you need downtime, you need rest time, you need your own time. So Monday to Fridays, I will respond. Canvas is where you find a lot of the access to your course information. Required text and resources, everything is accessed through Canvas. So it's accessed through the Canvas modules. So you have access to your textbook, you have access to the Cog Labs, you have access to the assignments. And then the last thing I want to do is just hit a couple of syllabus highlights. So there's a syllabus and contact information, course objectives, get to the important stuff, performance evaluations. There's a variety of different performance evaluations. This is one of the ones that I wanted to make sure that we got to. There's a variety of different performance evaluations in this course. There are pre-tests, there's Cog Labs, there's exams. They are due at different times. So please be very careful to make sure that you are up to date on when these things are due. So dates throughout the semester, see the course schedule. The Cog Labs, the critical thinking assignments, and the video learning, those are due throughout the semester. So nothing is due at the end of this week. Everything is always due at the end of the week. Nothing is due this first week, but next week, take a look if there's any Cog Labs that you need to do. If there's any critical thinking assignments, there won't be. Those come at the end of the semester. If there's any video learning that you need to do, those are throughout the semester. And the reason for that is that the video learning helps you understand how to engage with the course and engage with your textbook. The Cog Labs are your way to experience what we're learning about, and we will be taking those up in class and basically showing you what happened in class. So they're demonstrations, experiments that you actively participate in. It's one of the best ways to learn and understand what we're talking about. And that works best if they're throughout the semester. So the idea is that you participate in the Cog Lab, and then in a future lecture, we'll take a look at the Cog Lab and explain everything and what it means for cognitive psychology. But that's impossible to do if you don't participate in the Cog Labs. Final day of classes, basically everything else. So your pre-test, your homework, your post-test, chapter mastery training, those are all due on the final day of classes. So this is a very, very flexible course. I've had students who have had really, really busy Novembers. I had this one student whose November was just going to be, she was going through a hard time, and November was going to be a hard time. And she asked me, she goes, can I finish everything, by November 1st? And I said, yeah, if you have it in yourself to do it, go ahead, do everything by November 1st. And she did. And she freed herself up a lot of time to deal with the things that she needed to deal with. You can do any of the dates throughout the semester early. Feel free to do them early. Final day of classes, pre-test, homework, post-test, chapter mastery training. I will give a special mention for chapter mastery training. Chapter mastery training is where it's an online adaptive learning solution where you master the concepts that we're learning about in each chapter. It is designed to take into account how human beings actually learn. And because of that, it uses distributed practice. What that means is that you might have to do multiple attempts before you finish the mastery training. And after a certain time doing mastery training, it will kick you out for a certain period of time, maybe 8 hours, maybe 24 hours. It'll basically say, you have learned as much as you can at this period of time, come back tomorrow and you can start over again. I only mention that so that you are aware that you need to schedule your time for mastery training and try to do that throughout the semester. Because even if you could mentally do it all in a single day, mastery training will not allow you to do that. It will lock you out because it enforces that distributed learning. So please be aware of that for your deadlines for the final day of classes. Final day of exams are all the exams. So if you want to save it all for the last day when you have like a firm handle on cognitive psychology, feel free to do that. If you take a look at exam number 1 and say, hey, you know what, those first 3 chapters we did, I am solid, do it then, right? This is very flexible, designed to be accommodating to how different students might learn. All right, misinformation. AI course policy. I love artificial intelligence. I think a lot of the policies that universities have are very unfair towards artificial intelligence. So if you want to use, and we'll talk about AI in this course, not surprisingly, a lot of people don't like the term artificial intelligence. They like alternative intelligence, which I think is more apt. But basically, if you want to use ChatGPT or whatever AI program that you use to help you learn in this course, absolutely go ahead. You're not actually handing in any essays or anything like that. But if you are struggling with the material and you don't understand cognitive dissonance, feel free, go to ChatGPT. Hey, explain like I'm 5. What is cognitive dissonance? And use it however you like. You don't have to cite it. You don't have to tell me that you're doing it. It's a tool. Feel free, use it. And then the last thing that I'll mention, everything is always due Sunday by midnight. So if we had anything due this week, it would be due Sunday by midnight. We don't have anything due this week. And you'll remember that all the assignments are due outside of the Cog Labs and the visual learning. They're all due on the final day of classes. The exams are all due on the final day of exams. But I do not want to just give you an open world course and say, hey, I'm not going to guide you at all in terms of maybe what's a good sequence to do. So for that, I put together these class schedules, and basically they tell you what we're going to be covering in any given week. So week 2, we got it here. And then they'll give you my recommended steps to navigate this course. So you can see step 1, video learning, your orientation to MindTap. That is due at the end of that week. Highly recommend, do it at that time. Anything that is bold is used in the calculation of your final grade. Anything that's not in bold is used to help you learn. So you are not going to be graded on whether you read chapter 7. Long-term memory encoding, retrieval, and consolidation, basically, how do you study effectively? But you should do it. And again, this is my suggestion. So you'll see it week to week, what steps I suggest to do. But again, other than the COG labs and the visual learning and the critical thinking tasks, everything else is due at the end of the semester and at the end of the exam period. All right, so any questions about any of that? Okay, so even though we don't have anything due this week, highly recommend check out Canvas, get into the Mind tab, make sure that everything is functioning. Let me know if it's not, and we'll work it out. But other than that, we are done for the day. Stay safe out there, and I will see you on Thursday.